coaches, thanks for joining me for another Modern Soccer Coach interview. Today we're going to talk to Jack Cassidy, Senior Development Phase Coach at Cambridge United. We're going to talk about how we can add a little bit more detail and preparation to make our sessions a little bit more relevant to the topic and to the games that our teams are playing or the style that we want them to play. Jack sent over a research project that he did about goals scored in the Premier League and then how he linked that into session design. So if you want to read the study, please check on the link below. And when you're looking below, please give it a like and a subscribe as well, if you wouldn't mind. Helps us spread the word of the podcast and helps promote the channel as well. Thank you so much for your support. If you want more ideas on session, there's plenty of stuff over there, modernsoccercoach.com. Thanks so much again for the support. Here is Jack. Enjoy. Jack, thanks so much for joining me today on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Really excited to have you on.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Gary. It's good to connect and looking forward to talking football.
Do you think we still have an issue in the coaching world with people rocking up and just delivering something they've done before or they've thought of on the way in or they've picked up on social media earlier that day?
I think it's really difficult, isn't it? Because it's definitely sort of contextual in terms of it's sometimes difficult to criticise that parent who's given up. You know, they might have finished work at 6 o'clock. The session starts at 6:30. They're dashing in, haven't had an opportunity to think about the session, grabbing their bag and going to the session. So I think it's all like contextual to the environment that coach works in. But I do believe that the more planning you can give to your session and the way that it's designed, the way that you're thinking about the outcomes of that session, the better it will be. I do honestly believe that, and I think, you know, we've all had sessions like that where we've just pulled out a stock session because we've been absolutely chocker and we're running to the pitch and the group before has only just finished and we're the next slot on, and that can become difficult. But I do think it's the more thought we can give to the plan of the session. I just think quite simply it will be better delivered.
We talk a lot about in podcasts and these coaching philosophy chats in general about, you know, your game model and designing your principles, and something that jumped out initially in your presentation that you sent over was these training principles. How important are training principles? It's something that you don't hear a lot about, especially over here in the US.
I think it was more around what I wanted my session to look like in terms of not so much around the style of play. So regardless of whatever style of play it is, so whether I was working as an assistant coach for manager X or manager Y, whether I was working in an academy or first team level, whatever it may look like, it was what is it that underpins what I want included in my session. So I very much, when I sort of did the analysis on all the Premier League goals analysis study, it was, well, what's the main thing that I've taken from that study? And one of the biggest things that jumped out of me was transition. So many goals, and people would already know these things anyway, come from moments of transition. So every time I design a practice, and it's not going to, of course, there'll be some unopposed practices which don't tick all these boxes, but in the little corner of my session plan of each practice I deliver, I have 3 things that I try to tick: simplicity, transition, and competition. So the transition ones I already mentioned around, even if I'm doing an attacking topic, is there an element of a transition in there? So making sure that I'm not just stopping it, even if it was an unopposed attacking pattern, it may be that if they miss, they've got to sprint back to a cone as if they're counter pressing, something like that. If it's a game type directional practice, you'll naturally get the transition anyway. Simplicity, because I think sometimes we can overcomplicate the practices. So does the practice have direction? Is it easy to explain to the players? I think the longer we're there trying to explain 10, 15 rules, it's going to be more difficult for us then to be watching the sessions for the outcomes we want, because we're actually just policing then the rules. So is it simple practice? Does it have targets or goals? So if possible, I like practices to have direction. And then the last one is just competition. I just think by keeping the score, it just increases the will to win. It increases the intensity. It increases the tempo, and you're also just developing that winning mentality. So for me, those are 3 things that, regardless of where I worked, I will always try and tick those boxes, because I think that can be molded regardless if a manager wanted you to coach in a way where the team plays direct or plays with a low block, all of those things, I think it's quite transferable. It's just that it's the way in which I would want to deliver my sessions. So it's probably more those training principles is what I call them, but it's more about, I suppose, how I want it to be taught.
Yeah, the transition element is really interesting. That's something that when I watch a Premier League game and you see them in the ability for them to for the attacker to pick the right option with the right way to the pass, and always to get something, they get a lot from their transitions. Where if you watch at lower levels, maybe it is a bit more transitional in terms of volume. The quality is also a bit hit and miss. But whenever you take that to a training pitch and you say, all right, such and such needs to be better technically in transition, Coach X may redesign a session that is controlled and slower, but then takes away that chaotic element of transition. How do you think you could improve a player to execute those techniques in transition?
That's where I think it links back to making sure that I don't think transition, for me, where possible, should be a part of most of your practices, rather than it sort of just being worked on in isolation. So it may be that today's focus is on finishing in and around the box. But if you're a team that wants to be really quick at counter-pressing and regaining the ball, even though the work and the coaching points and all the delivery may be around, we're working on finishing in and around the box today, but you might just have a couple of things in there where you might just have a couple of footballs or cones laid out where if that team misses, they've got to quickly react and take a shape off that cone because they're imagining that missed shot is the goalkeeper catching it and rolling it out to that cone or colour that you maybe call. And then I just think that builds that reactions that you then want. If you want to be a good team in transition, which from some of the research that I've seen and a lot of us would know, that the game is very much a transitional game with so many goals being scored within 4 passes, then you've got to be very good at either trying to get it back quickly or closing up the space or playing forwards quickly and running forwards quickly when we regain it. So I think just trying to have that transition present within the practices with how you design it means that essentially you should be working on transition every day.
In that study, you analysed those trends then from the attacking goals in the Premier League. What are some ways that coaches can, I'm sure there's a number of youth coaches here that watch Premier League football. Now, some might watch it as fans and some might watch it with, I'm sure everyone watches it to an extent of ideas and inspiration. What are some ways do you think coaches can get a little bit more out of that, watching football and taking stuff away that they can then use as inspiration or use as information for their players?
I'm stealing advice really that someone gave me once, and it was around almost imagining the game was a little bit like, and maybe the younger generation won't remember, but a flip book.
Yeah.
So rather than trying to look at the whole thing, it's almost like imagining you're just taking a little segment out of the game. So I'm just going to look at the crosses that are coming into the box today. Where are they actually coming from? You might just dot it down on a pad. And if you're taking a different little segment of the game each week, slowly you're building up your flip book and building a picture of what the whole game looks like. So it may be that next week in your session, you're actually looking at defending the box. If I just reverse the topic that I used as an example before. So you might be watching Manchester United v Arsenal. I'm just going to watch how Arsenal, what they do when they defend close to their own goal and around the box. What do they do when the ball's in this situation? What do they do? So rather than trying to look at the game in such a big way, you're almost simplifying what you're actually then looking at it. And I think that makes it easy to then extract some of the things you're seeing, because then otherwise it becomes difficult if you're trying to look at everything at once.
I tell you what, see when you do that and you watch one theme, the level of the appreciation you have, let's say it's defending the box, and you want to talk about centre backs, body shape when crosses are coming in and how good those guys are. And that's what kind of annoys me about a little bit about social media, is that there'll be 55,000 tweets about the VAR decision or whatever happened, not be one clip about someone's body shape. So unless you take that upon yourself, or maybe a small group of you to go do and follow up on, there's so much learning in that, right?
Definitely. And then they're clips that you could then share with the players. They're clips that then you could use. Okay, well, actually, there's a clip here of the way that this defender's body shape. Look how quickly he manages to go from this position to then defending the space in behind. What would that look like in a session? And then that can then start to inform some of the ways that you might design some of the practices with your players. So I think it's important to try and look at the game like that. But I think it's probably better to start with just trying to pick out certain elements that you want to focus on, to then give you over time little areas that then become sort of like a bigger project.
You mentioned there about, well, two things. You mentioned there about goals being scored in 4 passes or less, and then you also mentioned at the start about tagging and coding. And that's a question I want to ask you was, when you're getting those clips of goals in the Premier League, how far back are you going for your study? Is it time, pass sequence, or what is it?
Yeah, so good question. What I did was I took it back. If we're talking open play, if we just talk open play, because set plays almost speak for themselves, really. I took it back to where the last regain before the goal was scored.
Okay.
So I took where that regain took place on the pitch, what was the type of regain, and then what was the first action after the regain. The only difference I did for open play is I also decided that anytime the balls went back to the goalkeeper in open play, so the centre half has made a tackle on the centre forward, plays it back to the goalkeeper, that started a new build attack under a category which I called goalkeeper starting the attack. So if from that goalkeeper having the ball in his hands or at his feet, they went on to score, that would go into that category. So it was either from the goalkeeper or the last regain of where that took place. And then that gave me the categories, and I sort of built the categories based on the third it took place, with some more information delved into those areas.
Brilliant. Once you get a study like that, and I'm sure there's other coaches that have done smaller pieces of work, or maybe they just were interested in, maybe they pulled something off online and something, a build-up like Liverpool or Man City, inverted fullbacks, whatever it is. What do you think the process, or how would you describe or advise the process of taking a study and then linking that to session design? What should a coach take into consideration and through that with their planning?
The biggest thing for me when I started doing it was actually understanding where I was and myself. So I definitely have a bias towards defending practices. I do really enjoy the defensive side of the game and coaching the defensive side of the game. So, and although this still informs that side of the game, one of the reasons why I did it was to actually understand and get better at some of the understanding the attacking side of the game. It also was twofold, because I was then getting better at using software and those types of things. But I actually did it with a learning element in mind. I should get better at so many things by doing this, with the ultimate aim of it informing practice at the end of it. So I think the first thing was, it took me so many hours and so much time. And initially that frightened me to do it, because you're like, where are you going to find the time? You're a little bit put off. But once I got into it, it was so worthwhile, because it started to reaffirm. Sometimes we're in the room, we're having conversations, and we might have a belief that something should be done this way. And I had some of those beliefs, but sometimes I didn't necessarily have anything that underpinned it or backed it up. And it's great being able to go online and pull off other people's research. That's what it's there for. But to actually see some of the things with my own eyes, and to be honest, it actually changed some of my beliefs on certain things as well, because I was like, wow, I didn't actually know that. And it's actually challenged some of the beliefs that I may have already had. So that was an interesting element of it. So I think I've gone a long way round about answering your question there. Then how it looks on the pitch, where possible, it's trying to design your sessions where those things take place on the pitch. So I've nicked the same pitch geography that a lot of us would have learned on, say, sort of the FA courses that we do here. But I like that terminology. I think where possible, if you can it's so frustrating when you can't do a finishing session in the actual 18-yard box where you're using the reference points of the box, you know, and and if I'm not, I'll actually mark out an 18-yard box. Otherwise, you lose the context for me. So I think if you're working on a midfielder's receiving, can that be done in the middle of the pitch? So I think it's just trying to work out what does it actually look like. It's almost a game within a game. You're looking at the 11v11 game. What is it we're working on today? Where does that take place? What player does that involve? And then what does my practice look like based on that?
Hello, coaches. We'll take a quick break from this interview with Jack. If you're a club coach or a high school coach or a college coach and you're in the middle of your season and you're looking for some fresh ideas on training sessions, please head on over to modernsoccercoach.com. We have a new PDF out, Mikel Arteta training sessions. The videos on the YouTube page. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss any more of them. But if you want to support the work and you want to get some more ideas, you can do both those things. Head on over to modernsoccercoach.com/shop. Take a look at the ebooks. Take a look at the scanning book. Take a look at the webinars. Makes a massive difference. Thanks so much for the support. Back to Jack.
You mentioned first about the things that maybe challenge some preconceived ideas or preconceived opinions about something. What would be an example of one of those things that you kind of changed your mind about after doing the study?
In the Premier League in particular, it was how influential, and I know it seems obvious, but I was a little bit surprised at the lack of success from static goal kicks. So, or actually, I think that reaffirmed it. It was under almost 1%. There was only, I think, if I'm off the top of my head, 12 goals out of just over 1,000 goals that came from a team's actually scoring directly from a static goal kick.
Wow.
However, in open play, if we exclude set plays, and bearing in mind this is only how I've done this study, so somebody else doing this may do the categories totally differently. So actually, it's very independent to how I view the game as well. But in open play, one of the third highest methods of scoring goal was involving the goalkeeper from open play. So it was the importance of actually the goalkeeper does have an important part in the Premier League in the build-up, but not necessarily when I think, right, if we watched a lot of sessions, if the topic was build-up, do a lot of coaches start that from a static goal kick? And if they do, should we think about having an element of transition in there where it actually starts with your team somehow regaining the ball, playing back to your goalkeeper, and you build up starting from there? That would just be an example from the top of my head of how that may impact your practice design. If your topic is build up that week, where does it start from? Why does it start from that? And that was sort of something that challenged me to think about that in what build up is in a different way.
Well, that's really interesting because in that example, you've actually just outlined how maybe to reverse engineer the process would be. All right, so I know that happens with an outcome or an objective reference. So now to go back, can I recreate that in a different way? So it doesn't just challenge maybe an opinion that you or an idea you had before. Maybe it challenges the setup because we're all taught, you see an attack and build-up session starts quite clean. Everything starts clean because that's how we're all taught to do things. But the game's not clean.
No. No. Another big one was around the methods of regain. The third highest regain was a second ball. So you had a tackle or steal, which is a tackle, an interception, and then the third highest was a second ball. And it got me thinking about the design of the practice, particularly maybe in the academy game in England, where depending on the games program, there might not actually be many opportunities where there's a lot of second balls taking place. So therefore, if we know that that's quite a high demand in the senior game, how are we exposing them to that? So rather than in a small-sided game, the ball just being started from the goalkeeper or on the floor from the coach, maybe do we create a second ball where a goalkeeper has to play long? So that there's some sort of aerial duel for a central defender or a defender, and then that creates some sort of second ball moment. Or the coach does the same thing from the side. So it got me thinking around, how am I restarting my small-sided games? Because with some real different subtle ways, I could expose the players to some of the demands that they're going to be needed to be exposed to in the senior game.
Yeah, well, now that's a topic there, because we talked before about, player pathways from academy to first team in your current environment, and that's something that, when you're making the jump from 16, 18 to first team senior football, big part of that's got to be physicality. As more academies become, again, clinical in their session design with whatever you want to call rondo and quite clean, with players are then exposed to less second balls and maybe hard transitions and that. So maybe would there be an element of that we should be building into session design if we're looking at that pathway?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that got me thinking about different types of restarts within the games to create those different types of actions, because it's, like I said, the one after second ball is aerial duel. Now, I know you have to be really, when we're talking about younger age groups, you're careful with the heading protocols and so on. But if we're talking sort of the older age groups as well, it's definitely something that I think they need to be exposed to. But they can also be exposed to that through the games program, playing a variety of different teams. So it may be that you're not, when you have a free weekend, you might play a non-league side. I know a lot of professional clubs over here in pre-season, their 21s will play a lot of non-league sides, and I actually think they're probably some of the best games that they get throughout the whole season, because they look so different to what an under 21s game might look like in this country.
You mentioned video before. You also mentioned about coaches keeping their own logs, and obviously I'm assuming that you're talking to youth coaches as well that can do that. But a common, not complaint, but a common, I suppose, challenge for coaches is that if they're not with a professional club or a club with a lot of resources or a big facility, they may not have the facilities to sit everyone down and show it all. What are some ways you recommend they overcome that?
iPad can be quite a good way, because you can actually take that to the pitch. So sometimes it may be you're showing stuff in smaller groups. We're actually in the process of moving training grounds, so we're going to have the luxury of a new analysis suite being built. But today I was actually using a small monitor in an old changing room, so we were just finding a way to. So it's trying to find that way. If you're going to a venue which doesn't have any indoor facilities, I think iPads can be quite an effective. And then sometimes it may be about trying to modernize it. So what I did before previously was I started and I know you have to make sure that making sure we're doing this all within safeguarding, but we started like a club Instagram, and we would put video clips on that Instagram because they're on Instagram anyway. Sometimes it would be clips where the coaches are speaking over it. Sometimes it might be, here's a brilliant example of Aaron Wan-Bissaka 1v1 defending. And I thought that was a really powerful way to get analysis across to the players in how that they watch videos anyway. I suppose you could do that with maybe TikTok now, or maybe I'm actually too old school saying Instagram, but I think that's quite a good way, particularly if you're at a grassroots level, of how you can be really engaging with some of your content. You might have little minute meetings, minute videos on this, so you could actually do it shorter but more frequently, but just through the platform, because they will see it. You can send videos through WhatsApp or like the team apps that you use to communicate with your players, whatever that may be for the appropriate age group. But I found that was quite a powerful way of doing stuff, because you wouldn't have to just share tactical videos. It may be you've seen an interview on Sky Sports of there was a clip that a member of staff put in our staff chat, Jamie Redknapp, speaking about just playing doing the basics last night. I can't recite all of it. He's just talking about running forward, running back, and so like you could put that little video on your Insta. So that was quite a good way. I think that's quite a. There's always a way that you can do for context for your environment if you're willing to sort of be creative and find it.
Going post session now. Again, sometimes for attacking session, I had this conversation with coach last week. Sometimes with an attacking session, when the goals are flying in, a coach or players can feel good about it because everyone's in good form and there's momentum and confidence. Sometimes it can lack that realism because there's not 50 goals in a football match. So sometimes if it's challenging attacking session, there's actually not as many goals. How these dynamics in this thought process, how would you recommend a coach approach the post-game review, self-review first and foremost from an attacking session?
I think that's an interesting example you've given, because you're looking at it going, did they get practice at the actions that you wanted them to practice? So let's say you're referring to finishing inside the box, like you said. Okay, they're getting a lot of actions, but then are they then being challenged? So if they are scoring a lot of goals during that session, had you pre-planned ways that you might progress or regress that session? And for me, that just comes down to the individual needs of the players. You might have a player who's really struggling with confidence. It may be that, well, I'm not going to put 2 defenders, so he's not even getting a shot. We're actually just going to purely work for him, so he's getting an opportunity to shoot. It may be that when you're doing a small-sided game, but the small-sided game starts with him getting set for a shot. If he scores, a new ball comes in from the goalkeeper. If he misses, the game carries on from there. But if we're speaking purely about that finishing session alone, I think that's got to be dictated to by the players and what they need really to see what you get out of it. So it's looking at, were they challenged throughout the session? Did they get practice of that action, and did it look realistic to what they're going to face in the game?
Or buzzwords a couple of years ago. I actually don't think a lot of coaches have the desire. I think during COVID it was really cool we had nothing else to do, so we were all open to different ideas. But I think sometimes coaching communities, it's quite a closed, very guarded. And I think sometimes individually we can become quite guarded to taking on new information. When you're dealing with a group of coaches and a staff, I'd imagine that can be quite difficult. So something I think about quite often today is how a group of coaches can actually help each other. I don't know if it's challenge or check or whatever it is to be stay on top of the cutting edge. How would you, how do you, as you get into leadership roles in football, how do you think you can impact other people with the same type of mindset? I don't know if that question makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, my role isn't necessarily a leadership role in terms of overseeing other coaches. I can only comment on the environment now. We've got a first team manager who's just cultivated a really open environment where you feel like you can make suggestions, be open. It's very linked from the first team to the youth team and the under 21s in terms of we're all on the same site. You can go and watch. If you're an academy coach of any age, you could go watch the first team train, no problem. No one would have a problem with it. And so I think that's something which I think has been really powerful, because I think it makes staff feel comfortable at giving their opinion and contributing rather than maybe just agreeing for the sake of agreeing. Another brilliant environment, I was lucky enough in the summer to go to Right to Dream at FC Nordsjælland in Denmark, and the big thing they speak about is psychological safety. So that, and I'm saying this secondhand, but I know there was a coach CPD where the under 14 coach challenged the first team head coach around the style of play when they were sort of having a coaching debate, and they opened that, and it was a really open environment, and the head coach was actually agreed with some of the points at this. So it's almost like, well, when they were in that room, their title wasn't of importance. It was just about the football club getting better. But I get sometimes football people can be insecure. Its jobs change quickly, and I think it's the nature of the environment where some people do feel closed and just want to protect themselves, and I think you just have to navigate that, because that part of it is what it is. If you're lucky, like I feel really lucky at the moment with the environment that I'm working in, because I've worked in ones that have been totally the opposite of that, and it's been not a nice place to be. And I just think that's just due to that openness in that environment. So I think it's just trying to create that. And even if it may be that you're a group of coaches in a club, but there might be 3 of you working in one age group, you can just create that for yourselves within that. have that openness and that safety to check and challenge each other. And I think that so there's ways to get around that.
Hopefully this wasn't one of the clubs you were complaining about. Luton Town, your time in Luton a couple of years ago, obviously like them being in the Premier League now at a massive climb. What were some things that, or did you see any foundations that were being laid a couple of years ago, or any insights around that?
Yeah, I think it was just more how the new, well, it wasn't new, but the takeover when they were in the National League, and it was just more, I think, how off the pitch the club just got sorted out in terms of being run far more sustainably. Obviously, as an academy coach, you wouldn't necessarily be privy to the ins and outs of how that looked, but it was just clear that there was a clear structure and model in place that's given them a platform to grow. I was there when Nathan Jones then returned and kept the club up, and that was during the COVID, where the season stopped for COVID. Then Nathan come back, and then the games resumed. And I think after Nathan came back and the club stayed in the Championship, they just really kicked on, and they just went from strength to strength. And I think that they were just a really good example of how they've done things in a slightly different way. I think they've gone against the trend a little bit in terms of how they play, and how they've maximised the resources that they've spent. So I think they're. I'm sure there'll be other clubs looking at it. I think Brentford are probably another example of that, if you can put them in a similar bracket. But yeah, so it was. I wouldn't say I was privy to loads of things, but I think you could see slowly what was being cultivated. I just think it's just a really efficiently run club with good people.
Brilliant. Last one for you then. Your current role as development phase coach, obviously dealing with a lot more. We talked about it off air. A lot more individuals and managing those individuals, and it's becoming more and more of a role and especially in the UK, more of a specialised role. Managing the individual in the team environment is complex. And what are some secrets to the success of putting it all together?
Well, so it's a very new role. So I'm only 7 weeks in. So essentially, I suppose the normal term would be like I'm an under-21s coach in a way. But what's very different is we don't play in an under-21s games program. So we have a smaller number of players. So they're not an under-21s team as such, but they fall in the under-21s bracket, so to speak. So my responsibility is I look after 10 players, and I'm responsible for managing the loans of those players. So we believe, and as a club, that to best prepare them for the EFL rather than the under-21s game program, we feel that we should get them out on loan to play senior football. So they have a blended training week where they'll have training hours with us. That might be individually with myself. It may be when they're involved in the first team training. Also, they'll train with their loan team on an evening a week, and they'll play for that loan team on a Saturday in what we know as our non-league pyramid here in the UK, which is still very strong. So I certainly believe in the program. The club believes in the program. I think the players get a really nice blend between sort of individual development, team training, different things that we put in place for them in terms of workshops and different elements like that. It's still in its infancy, and I think what was all very attractive about it was not just the people that I've now got to work with and the quality of the players, but it's quite a new program, so I can bring ideas to it and sort of shape it how we feel it should be shaped. But I think just the fact that the players are being exposed to senior football, I think one of the biggest things that first team managers want in players is trust. And I think the more senior games they play, the more first team managers will trust them. That's what I honestly believe. Not all the time, because I do think it's very individual for players on their own individual journey. But I do think loans and playing senior football can be a good driver to trying to bridge that gap between our youth team and our first team, specifically at our football club.
Brilliant. All right, what's next? What's the next project?
Oh, do you know what? I need a break. That was so time consuming, that one. And now with this new role, I've said to myself, I'll give myself a break up till Christmas. But I know what I'm like. I'll start something else, Gary. So I'm sure I'll be delving into something else as time goes on.
Brilliant. Well, Jack, thanks so much for coming on, and thanks for sending that and sharing all that stuff, and definitely keep up the great work, and we'll get another topic and get you on again, hopefully.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gary. No, thanks for having me, mate. I've appreciated it.